I'm about to give you a comprehensive free tutorial on the features and operations of the Denon DJ Prime GO standalone DJ console, mainly focusing on the hardware functions. It's a wonderful piece of kit, quite unlike anything else out there right now. Battery powered, portable, doesn't need a laptop to DJ with, and while it might look like a gadget, it has all the pro features that serious DJs expect. 2 mic channels, booth and master output, performance pads, and the advanced engine operating system powering it, all controlled by this gorgeous multi-gesture touchscreen. It's great for playing DJ sets on the go, for event DJs who maybe need a second system for another room, say at a wedding, and equally just if you haven't got room for something bigger. Now if you're coming from another Denon DJ model or another hardware brand or another type of DJ system, check out our table of contents. You can hit Control and F or Command and F depending on your computer. Type in the keyword. If we've got a chapter marker, it will be highlighted. Hit the time code and it will jump to that specific part of the video. Now this is designed to be a video manual, so do feel free to come back and reference it as often as you like. If you're a beginner or an intermediate DJ, I do have a word of warning though. This video alone is not going to be enough for you to play great sets with a Prime GO. There are too many skill sets and pieces of knowledge that you have to be able to assemble to crush it in DJing. So I can teach you about this piece of gear, but if you don't know about the rest of the gear that you need, or how to find and organize music, or the basics of counting and timing and beat mixing, or the skills of programming and performing a DJ set, or indeed how to successfully get booked to play at parties, things of that nature, you're going to be frustrated. When I got started back in 1992, we didn't have YouTube. We had to learn by trial and error. I learned on cheap Gemini turntables and a rubbish mixer. It took me years to get good. I remember nearly giving up several times, but I didn't. I stuck with it, and DJing became my career. It's brought me decades of joy. So I make you that promise. Yes, if you're new to this, you're going to run into some frustrations, but it's my job to get you through them. The teaching style that we use here at Digital DJ Tips is to focus on the end result, to actually get you quickly playing in front of other people. That's where the magic happens. That's where the real learning happens. It's not in your bedroom, it's not in your home studio, it's in front of real people. Too many people who want to be DJs spend months or even years locked away behind closed doors, practicing all the wrong stuff, when they could have learned more in just a few hours at a real gig than all those frustrating home sessions added up. Today's DJ gear makes playing gigs, even as a beginner, perfectly possible if you learn the right things early on. Now that said, we've got a crash course for beginners called the Complete DJ Course, where I teach you all you need to know to play regular gigs fast. Even better, it works not only on the Prime GO, but for all DJ gear. Once you follow the course, you'll not only be a great DJ, but you'll be able to play confidently in public on any system. It's about an 80 lesson course at last count. It does kind of keep growing. You get access to me personally as your tutor, and there are loads of other benefits to help you learn. It's a phenomenal investment in your DJing. I'll put a link to the course in the description underneath so you can check out that info page. Now another great resource is our Amazon best-selling book on how to DJ Rock the Dance Floor, which is a fantastic primer on those big 5 areas of DJing: gear, music, techniques, playing out and promoting yourself. This has helped tens of thousands of DJs to get started. Again, there's a link in the description, but I'll also tell you how you can get a free copy of this a little bit later on. Now we've got a tremendous amount of information to get through, so let's get started. So I'm going to talk you through how to set this unit up very briefly now. Then we'll look at the features of the unit. Then we'll look at how to operate it, the operation side of it. And at the end, I'll talk you through the menus on the unit because there's a lot of menus to talk about here. So setting it up is really a case of doing, well, 3 things. The first thing is make sure you've got the latest firmware and the latest software. So make sure you've got the latest version of the Engine Prime software for your Mac or Windows computer in order to analyze music. And make sure you've got the latest Engine OS firmware on this unit so that it works smoothly with the software. The second thing is you are going to want to pre-analyze your music using the Engine software. That's what the software is for, and then export that music onto a USB drive that can plug into the back of your Denon DJ Prime GO. And the third thing you're going to want to do, of course, is set the unit up. And by doing that, I mean plugging in your headphones, plugging in your powered speakers, getting the power in. Although it does have a battery, the power will charge that battery for you. And if you want to plug a microphone in, you're going to plug that in around the back as well. And once you've done all that, we can start looking through. So if you haven't done that stuff now and you want to go ahead and do it before we look through the features to get together, go and do that. So let's start by looking at this screen. It's a gorgeous screen. You can see we get multi-gesture. It runs really smoothly. It's lovely color, everything on it can be touched. It's just a really, really nice screen. So the screen is a rightful center point here, and I'll talk to you more about how to use the screen, stuff that we aren't covering naturally as we talk through the features in the operations part of this tutorial. So moving down then to the browse knob here, you turn this knob to navigate through lists. So I'm looking at this list here at the moment, which is my playlists, and you press the button on it when you're somewhere to move this way. So I'm now wanting to look into digital DJ tips tunes. You'll see it's moved me now into this list here. Pressing the button when you're as far as you can go this way, which is always arriving at a list of tunes, will give you the choice of loading the tune that you just pressed to either deck 1 or 2, and you touch the deck and it will load that deck, the tune to that deck there. Another way of loading tracks onto decks is to press the load buttons here, left or right, and that will automatically go to the deck you've chosen that way. If you double tap on a deck load button, it will load the track that's on that current deck to the other deck instantly and start playing it. It's called instant doubles. So a quick double tap will instantly double the track up for you. If you press shift while you're pressing this button, instead of asking you if you want to load the track, it will add it to what's called the prepare crate. Now the prepare crate is here, and this is tracks that you have said, I might want to play these. So I'm putting them in a special crate so that I can decide whether it's actually the right time to play them, because I don't want to play them right now. So back into this list here, let's just say I wanted to add this track here, this one here, to the prepare crate. I'll hold down shift and press that. This flashes, and now in here you'll see that that mermaids track has been added down here at the bottom in this window here. So just another use to make you aware of there of this button on the browse knob. You see me pressing this view button here. It cycles between the library view and the waveform view, as you can see here. But if I hold down shift and press view, it will change the horizontal waveforms to vertical. Look at that. Now we have vertical waveforms here, and we get the advantage there of having a little bit of a library in the middle as well. Your choice as to how you like those laid out. And if I hold down the view button, I get to this menu here, which is the utility and preferences menus and so on, which I can tell you about, will tell you about towards the end. Long hold on the view button is menu. There's another function of the shift button, which is to access secondary functions on buttons. And one example of that is down here, the pitch bend. If I hold down shift and press these, it will access range, which I'll tell you about later, but that's how you do it. Shift will access secondary functions as well. Let's play some music, shall we? I'm going to hit the play button here. We'll talk to you about this stuff in a bit. So here we can see our master meters. Now these are showing us the volume that's going on in the room as regards where the master volume is set. As I turn it up, it gets higher. I'm going to leave it low for this tutorial so that it's not interfering with my microphone. These master meters then are our way of seeing how loud we're going and making sure we're not pushing too loud. Here we have the sweep effects. The sweep effects are effects that you can turn on by pressing the 1 or 2 button underneath them. Sweep effect A or sweep effect B. So number 1 is a filter. Let me turn this knob this way. It's cutting out all the high and mid frequencies, leaving just the low. And this way, it filters out all the low and mid frequencies, leaving just the high. Number 2 is a washout effect. This creates a kind of effect that DJs like to use when they're transitioning from track to track, because it echoes and then removes the track from the mix like this. And then you can start another track playing, right? And in the other direction, it's just a longer echo. It's 1 beat echo that way, and a half beat echo that way. You turn them on with these buttons depending on which deck you want to use each one on, and if you turn the buttons off, it doesn't do anything. So, moving around the unit then, the channel Q buttons here and here decide what you're hearing here, because with channel Q on there and that track playing, that's now not playing. The meters are down and we can't hear it, but it is playing in here. Hear that? So that's a way of listening to what's going on the other deck before you introduce it to the audience. It's a big part of DJing, of course, queuing. And these buttons here are the ones that decide which track is being queued in your headphones. You just see me use this. It's the crossfader. It decides whether this deck or this deck is playing to the audience. And in the middle you get both. And these are the individual volume faders for each deck, which again do the same thing. Going like that is the same as going like that. Moving around to here, these buttons here, hot cue, loop and roll, move us into the modes which is written on each button. And the modes then have these buttons here, which are part of how you control them. We'll look at all this later on, but that's what these buttons here are for, moving in and out of these modes. If you press the loop button twice, it changes color. You see it's green and blue. And the loop button is then in automatic loop mode and manual loop mode. Again, we'll talk about that later. If you're coming from another controller, you maybe haven't seen this button before, bank, and that's because there's only 4 of these buttons here, and bank will switch to 5, 6, 7 and 8. So there's really 8 buttons here, and bank will decide whether you're looking at 1 or 4, 1 to 4 or 5 to 8. These are called the performance pads, and we'll talk more about those later. This knob here is the auto loop encoder. It'll put a loop onto the track that you're currently playing, and you can see that that loop is now there, and I'll hit play. You can hear that that's now looping that section of the track by that number of beats. The number of beats is told to you at the top. That's a 2-beat loop. That's now a 1-beat loop. Turning this encoder to the left, it's a half-beat loop. Or I can make it longer by turning it in the other direction. If you press it again, it turns the loop off. Press it again, you get a new loop, depending upon the length that's currently set as to where this has been turned to. There's a little number at the top that tells you the length of the loop again, so you can see that before you press it. If I hold down the shift button and turn the loop encoder and the loop is engaged, it will move that loop. So shift and turn to the left will move the loop back. And you can see at the top I'm moving this whole loop through the track. If I turn it in the other direction, it'll move the loop forward, but it won't move where I am in the track with the loop in the same way it does when you move back. It will wait till you get to the track, catch up with it, and then continue to move around there. By the way, if the loop is turned off and I hold down shift and turn auto loop, it will quickly move through the track like this. You see I'm moving through the track at the top there, and it moves through the track in steps which correspond to where the loop length is set. It's currently set to 4 beats. But if I move this up to say 32 beats, you'll see I'll move through the track an awful lot quicker. It's a good way of moving around the track, but as you can hear, it's jumping by that exact number of beats, and because it's jumping by a mathematical number of beats, the track tends to sound all right when you do that. Nice way of quickly skipping towards the end of a track that your audience isn't really enjoying, for instance. That's loop move using shift and auto loop. I'm going to load a track onto the other deck, which is a little bit more suitable for what I'm about to show you. The sync button here and here activates sync on that deck. Sync is now activated on that deck. If I press play on this deck, that track is playing away, but it's not in sync. But if I press the sync button on this deck, the waveforms line up and the track's beats are now synced up as well. Now, if I press the sync button and keep my hand on it, it attempts to match the musical key of the tracks as well. So it's determined that it thinks that is the better musical key for this track to be in to mix with this one. These two controls here, look at the screen. These are adjusting the pitch or the tempo of the tracks. Because they're in sync, they're moving together. That's because sync means that these are always going to be tied together. If I was not in sync, and shift and sync will turn sync off, you can see it's only moving the one that I'm adjusting and the other one is independent. Now the amount that these move up or down is dependent upon the pitch range, and you set the pitch range by touching shift and pressing the minus or plus button. If I press that a couple of times, now you can see that we're moving just a small amount on that track, up or down. But if I press shift and go up, we can go to infinity. That's literally stop the track. Pitch range is useful because it's easier to do manual beat mixing where you're trying to keep two tracks together when the pitch range isn't so big, because the wider the range, the harder it is to keep things at the same speed, because any small movement of the control is a big movement relatively in BPM or in tempo. Now these two buttons here are pitch bend, and they momentarily slow down or speed up the track. This is permanent, right? But if you touch that, it slows it down, and touch that, it speeds it up, just for a moment. You can also do that like this, using the jog wheel. But some DJs like to have it on a button, and so Denon DJ traditionally has always put these buttons here as well. So without the shift button, these are going to momentarily move the pitch, and with the shift button, they move the range that you can permanently move the pitch up or down with the pitch fader. Now I've already introduced you to the jog wheel. You can see that when a track is paused, this is letting me scratch through the track like this. And scratch DJ the claws. This is what you use to scratch. When the track's playing, you've already seen this. This is letting me slow down and speed up the track. It's not giving me that scratch behavior. If I want that scratch behavior, I can press this little vinyl button, and now when the track's playing, I get the same behavior as when it's paused. Without that pressed, this is a nudge. It's the same as using these buttons when it's playing. But there's a way of getting them both, and that is leave the vinyl mode turned on and use the top to scratch and the edge of the platter to do the nudge. DJs prefer one or the other. If you accidentally touch the track here when you're meaning to do this, you might want to turn that off, especially if you never scratch. But if you do like to scratch on the jog wheels as well as just play tracks, you're going to want to have that turned on, and then you've got those two behaviors on the jog wheel. Now you see me use the play pause button, but you haven't seen me use the cue button yet. So let's talk about the cue button. When a track's playing, pressing the cue button will move the track to the initially set cue point and stop. That's stopped the track and moved it to the beginning of the track. And that's because there's a cue point, the initially set cue point is at the beginning. And you can see that by the little white arrows pointing up and down on the waveform. If I want to move that initially set cue point, let's say I wanted it on this beat here, I can move to it and press the button again. Whether it moves the cue point or jumps back to it is dependent upon whether the track is playing or not. If the track's playing, it will move back to the cue point and stop. Let's press play. I'll press the button now. It's now moved back to my cue point and stopped, but notice it's where I just set that cue point, not at the beginning of the track. And again, we can put this cue point wherever we want, and it will move to there as long as the track's not playing. If I press the cue point while we're paused, it will play the track momentarily. And as soon as I take my hand off that cue button, it stops. If I want it to continue when I take my hand off, I need to just tap the play pause as well. So this can be quite useful for performance, because you might want to go. And notice how on that last beat, I press play pause. Go back to the beginning again. This is momentary. I'll use my other finger to press play pause, and it continues playing. If you want to set a cue point while not pressing pause, say I want to set a cue point on the next beat, I can do that by pressing cue with shift on this beat here. The cue point is now gone there, and I can jump back to that cue point instead and I didn't have to pause the track in order to do that. This cue point is a good temporary way of moving around your track. The hot cue, which we're going to move on to later when we look into operations a bit more deeply, is a better way of having cue points set at different parts on your tracks, multiple cue points that you can then recall every time you reload the track. By pressing shift and play, it will jump us back to the cue point we've got set, but this time it'll just play from it. Whereas pressing Q when the track's playing, whereas pressing Q will jump us back to the cue point and pause, pressing shift and play will jump us back to the cue point and play. Which is another useful thing. Sometimes you don't want to pause when you jump back to the cue point, you want to do it bang on a beat, well you can do that by holding down shift. Moving around to the top parts of the unit, let's start here. This is the little light that's telling us the battery is charging. When the battery is fully charged, that will turn out. Here is the effects unit. This is one single extra effect that we can add to either of our decks, as well as the two sweep effects that we've already looked at. This turns the effect on or off. This selects the current effect, and you can see down here, the current effect is being shown to us. The list is being shown to us. You press down on it to choose the effect that you want. This adjusts how quickly the effect cycles or loops, and by pressing this down we sometimes get to control another parameter of the effect as well. And the other parameter of the effect in this instance is feedback. You can see it's altering here, whereas if I press it again, it's altering how quickly the effect cycles. And this knob here is how much of the affected sound we hear compared to how much of the clean sound, wet or dry. So wet is fully on, where we're hearing fully the affected sound. Dry is fully off, where we're only hearing the clean sound. So even with the effect on, if that's turned down, we're not going to hear it. These two buttons here decide whether the effect going on here is assigned to deck 1 or to deck 2 or to both. And these two little lights here at the bottom of the screen are showing us that as well. This little effects panel at the bottom of the screen can be turned off entirely by holding down shift and pressing this button here. That's gone now. So if you never use these effects, you can use that to get rid of that and give you a little bit more screen space for other things. We'll have a listen through the effects in the operations section that's coming after this. So now let's move on and look at these areas here. These are the areas where we can control the audio on each of these channels that's a bit more involved than just these controls here. So we have an input volume to start with. The input volume here controls the amount of level going into this control and these controls. So this is generally used to balance quiet tracks out with louder tracks. There's no metering about this, so we can't tell whether we're driving the channel a bit too hard. I tend to leave that at 11 o'clock, and if the track sounds a little bit quiet, I'll turn it up a bit. If it sounds a bit low, I'll turn it down a bit. These are the EQs. They're normally, in a bigger DJ system, in a line going up from here, right? But because there's no room, there's a screen above there, they've put them up here. There's our low, our mid, and our high. And you have exactly the same over here for this deck here as well. So talking about over here, let's move over and have a look at what we've got. This is the microphone section. Here we can control the two microphones. They have a volume control. They also have a tiny little light. I don't have a microphone plugged in, but if you've got this little light flashing green, it's okay. Amber is getting loud, and if it goes into red, the microphone's too loud. So it's almost like a little meter for the microphone here. There is also on-off for both microphones, and this one here has got a talk over, and you activate that by pressing the shift button and then pressing this button here. And if you activate talk over for the channel, what happens is that when you talk into the microphone, the music ducks down, and then when you stop talking, it goes up automatically. Just saves you having to go like this when you're talking, reducing the sound of the music so people can hear you. And that's only on microphone number 1. There's two output volume controls here. The master output, you've seen me using this. The booth output controls the output that goes to a second set of sockets around the back. We'll look at the front and back of the unit in a second. And they are typically used for DJ booth speakers, hence booth output. It's a separate output with a separate volume control. So in a club, the speakers might be a long way away from you, and near to the unit, you might have speakers close by. This will control the volume of those independently of the main dance floor. And this is also useful as an independent output for, say, a live stream, or if you were recording away from this unit, because you could alter the volume in the room using master, and then this volume stays the same, so that the recording doesn't have the volume going up and down as you alter the volume locally. So let's move around now and have a look at what's on the front of the unit and what's around the back of the unit. So here we have our headphones. You've got a 1/4 and an 1/8 inch headphone socket here, so you can use headphones which have got either kind of plug on them. These controls here are helping you decide what goes on in your headphones. So Q mix decides whether the mix that you're hearing in your headphones is all the master, in other words, totally ignoring the Q buttons that we looked at earlier, all the Q, in other words, totally ignoring the master, or a mixture of the two. Can be useful for mixing to have that choice in your headphones. This is a headphones volume control, and this control here is the volume control for the auxiliary input. And I'm going to show you where to plug the auxiliary input in a second as we go around to the back of the unit. Here is where we plug in an SD card, so we can use an SD card instead of a USB for music or for recording. You could even have all your music on one and be recording your sets onto another within the unit. Let's go look around the back then. This is a Kensington lock, so you can lock the unit up so it's a bit safer. Here we have two outputs for the master. These are XLRs that you would run long professional cables from. They're balanced, which means that they're nice, low interference, typically used to plug directly into a PA system. Meanwhile, here we have the RCA master outputs, which are the ones that you're probably going to use. They're for shorter cables that will be typically plugged into local loudspeakers, which is what we've got here. This little switch here is stereo mono, and that will put the whole unit into mono if you're playing in a venue that's got a mono PA, for instance. This is a booth output. These are TRS cables that plug into here, and they'll go off to left and right hand speaker in your DJ booth. This is an auxiliary input where you'll plug in an iPhone, for instance, with a backup set on it, or maybe another DJ. Lets you plug one extra audio source in, and we saw the auxiliary volume control a second ago. And these are the microphone inputs. You can plug in a microphone that's got a plug like this, or an XLR microphone into both of these. So moving along then, here we have the USB input for a computer. This is where we can plug in a USB drive. I've actually got an SD card in my adapter here. And this is a Ethernet connection, so you can plug in a hardwire internet connection instead of using the built-in Wi-Fi if you want to use streaming services. We'll talk about streaming services in a little while. Also, you can plug in stage link lighting, which is the lighting protocol that this unit supports to tie up the music with DJ lighting, which is quite exciting. Here's the power input, and this little thing here is for just doubling up the cable if you want to, so that if you yank on it by mistake, it won't pull it out of the back of the unit. So I am now going to move on to looking at the operations of this, how to use it. We've looked at a little bit of how to use it as we've gone through. It's kind of been inevitable that I wanted to show you bits and pieces, but we'll dive into a lot more of the detail of it now. I'm going to look at the screen. I'm going to show you how the library works, how to make playlists, how to search for tracks and do all that stuff. We'll look in a little bit more detail at some of the mixing operations of the unit, and then we'll look in a lot of detail at the hot cues, how they work, how to select different hot cue options, how to select loop options on these pads as well, how to use the roll on these pads. So I'll basically demo all this to you so you can see what this stuff does. And then finally, we're going to move on and look at the menus. We're going to look at every single option in the menus. But to start operation, because I know you wanted to hear them, we'll go right back to the effects here, and I'm going to talk you through every single effect. We'll have a listen to it, we'll see what they sound like, and I'll explain to you how to use these controls here to add effects to your music. I'm going to put a loop on this track and start it playing just so it doesn't stop as I'm demonstrating the effects to you. So the first effect is an echo. Let's get an echo going on here. Let's turn this on. I'll turn the wet dry down. Make sure we're assigned to our channel. We don't want it on channel 2, just on channel 1. And I've now got an echo set up here. So if I turn the wet dry up, you can hear an echo kicking in. I can actually take the music off, and you can hear that echo echoing out. An echo out is something DJs use an awful lot in order to quickly mix into another track, because if you have this set so that, and I'm going to now adjust the feedback parameter, so it's quite a big echo, and I'll set the wet dry so it's quite an intense echo, and I'm going to set the beat to 1 beat, so we're going to have quite an intense 1 beat echo here. DJs will often use this to echo a track out so that they can mix something else in, like this, and then start something playing on the other deck. That is an example of what's called post-fader effects, because you'll notice that when I pulled that down, even though the fader was down and that channel was effectively off, it let the effect finish. And that's a powerful thing, because with echo effects that have got a tail on them, you want that to happen. The next effect, we'll not look at delay, because delay is similar to echo. We won't look at hall because it's a kind of reverb, and there's another reverb at the end I will show you. Ping pong is another kind of effect. Autogate though is a completely different, sorry, ping pong is another kind of echo. Autogate is a completely different kind of effect to the ones we've looked at so far. So let's look at autogate now. So we'll dial this in, and I'm going to look at the wet dry. Let's set wet dry to quite high and start the track playing again. And I'll turn this on now. You hear that kind of pumping in-out volume effect? It's almost like it's doing this. And the reason I put my finger there is so that I can leave a bit of the music in the quiet section, because that's what that's doing. If I turn wet dry up, it cuts it out completely. So it's a bit like this. I'll turn it off. And you can alter, using the beats parameter, how quickly that happens. And depending on what the source material is, that's going to sound good or bad at different cut in and cut out points. Vocals can sound really good when it's going in and out really fast there. So the gate effect is another way of describing what's sometimes called a transform effect, which is literally transforming the sound in and out using the crossfader or the upfaders. It's a scratch DJ trick as well, but there's an effect there that does that for you. Flanger and phaser. Phaser is 2 down from flanger here, are similar. So I'm going to show you flanger. So flanger is a kind of whooshing effect. That's not the technical term, but you'll hear what I mean. I want to set the beats to quite high for this, to quite a long selection, 16 beats for it to cycle. Let's turn that on and get this track playing. And you will have heard this in 70s rock records, and also some DJs like to use this over big instrumental sections to add a bit of a sheen to what's going on. You can use it with a lower time. Where it tends to sound quite metallic, but most people, I believe, will use it up there somewhere to give that kind of whooshy effect. The next one is an LFO filter. Let's turn this on. I'll explain what this is doing. Because our beats is currently set to 16, every 16 beats it's putting a filter in and out. Let's set the beats to a little bit quicker. And that's really the same as turning the filter on here and doing that by hand. But again, just like the transform effect, it's cutting that in and out so you don't have to. The next effect is I said I wouldn't look at phaser because it's similar to flanger, is the crush effect. Let's turn crush on. This gives us a kind of 8-bit, and the more we affect it with the parameter, the more extreme it sounds. Kind of 8-bit bit crush effect, that's what it's called in its long name, bit crush. It's taking the lovely full digital signal and squashing it down so it sounds like an early computer. Beloved of people like Underworld, who use that kind of effect quite a lot on their productions. The next one is roll. This is like the loop roll, which we're going to look at when we look at the pads in a second. So I'll turn roll on now, and it adds a roll depending on the number of beats you've got selected here. So if I turn the track off, it's actually loop rolled 4 beats. It's a bit like an echo, but it's got subtle differences. So you can hear that even though the track's completely off there, that's not going away. And you can use this in tracks as well. So you can use this to give you a nice, let's set it to a small amount, every half beat. And by turning it on and off, I can dial that in and out. As I say, it's quite similar to an effect we've got down here, to a performance pad thing we've got down here. So we'll look at that again in a second. So let's now move down to reverse roll. It's the same thing in reverse. It plays that loop, but it plays it backwards. Scratch is a kind of scratch effect. So let's turn this on. You can hear it's playing forward, then back, forward, then back. Set it to 1 beat. It's kind of cool, I guess. I've never found much use for that myself, but it's there. And reverb's the other really big one, which I saved to the end because this is one of the ones you'll hear DJs using all the time. Let's turn a reverb on here. I'll turn the wet dry down. I've turned a reverb on, and let's set the decay quite high here. Okay, so with this on now, you're going to get a sense of being in a big room as I turn this up with the wet dry. And as I turn the track off, it disappears, and I can make it take longer to disappear by setting the decay higher. So now, takes forever to go away, doesn't it? And the one place you might hear this a lot, again, like the echo out, is a reverb out. So a DJ might be playing a track and decide it's time to end that track, dial in the reverb, and then take the whole track out like this. End of night, end of set, or just to go into another track, a big dramatic end to a song instead of cutting it dead. I want to give you a touch screen overview now. This is performance view, and I want to talk to you about the track waveforms here. So at the top, we have a waveform that we can zoom in here. In other words, we choose where we are in the waveform on the top, and this is the bit we can see. And this moves through automatically as you're playing the track. So this is your big track overview and a zoom in of the current part. Remember, we can alter this by pinching like this. So down here, the little dashes are marking the individual beats, and the little red dashes are marking the beginning of each bar or 4 beats of music. This line across the middle is the playhead. It's the part of the track that's currently playing. So down at the bottom here, the key is marked by these numbers and letters in the Camelot system, 6A and 3A, and you can tap that to change the key if you've got key lock on. These numbers here, -118.5, is the time left in the track, and by tapping on that I can show the time elapsed in the track as well, and the number immediately above that is the current BPM. This little symbol here, the little circular symbol, is the sync symbol, and it changes how it looks depending upon how you have sync set. We'll move on to talk a little bit more about sync in a minute. And this bar across the bottom is showing us how far through the track we are as well. It's just another way of seeing how far through the track we are. So let's now look at the central area, which is the library preview. So in here, we can zoom through like this, nice and quickly, everything that's in the current playlist or list. We can also use the scroll bar at the side to do the same for that. I can load tracks here, just swipe to the left to load to the left-hand deck, swipe to the right to load to the right-hand deck. And there's library and search down here as well, which I'm going to move on to in a minute. There are 2 other views we've got. Before we do though, I just want to show you a secret feature here. Put your hand at the top above the screen and pull down, and you pull down this toolbar, which has got some really useful things in it. So the first thing is quantize. You tap this on or off to enable or disable quantization. So this allows anything that relies upon snapping to the beat, so time-based features such as triggering cues and loops they'll happen bang on the beat. If you're a bit early or a bit late triggering a cue or a loop, it will understand that you want that to happen right on that beat. So it's a nice way of tidying up what you're doing, and there's preferences for that we'll see later on when we move into the menus. Continue, you tap to enable continuous playback of tracks, and tap it again to disable that, which will basically play the next track when the current track has ended. Tapping record will jump you to the record page quickly. Stop time is a slider which will adjust how quickly the track stops, or the tracks stop, when you hit the stop button. It's currently set to 0. If I press stop, the track stops dead, right? If I set this to half, you can see it took a little bit longer for the track to stop there. If I set it all the way, it sounds a bit like turning the power off on an old-fashioned turntable when we stop. You'll probably want to have that set about there, or maybe a little bit further up. It's the kind of sweet spot for me. Gives you a nice kind of authentic sounding vinyl break without it going too over the top. Contour adjusts how quickly the crossfader fades from one source to the other. If you have this set very, very cut like there, This basically means if I've got 2 tracks playing, as soon as I move it a tiny bit, you'll hear the other track. Just move it a tiny bit. There you go. If I have that set to very smooth, it takes a long time for the other track to come in. In fact, you need to be quite a long way past the center for the other track to be starting to get loud. Again, you're probably going to want to have that set somewhere in the middle as you're learning. The preview volume here allows you to adjust the volume of tracks when you're auditioning them in the Q headphones, and I'll show you a little bit more about that in a bit. This button here turns the crossfader off completely. That crossfader is not doing a thing now. This one next to it turns the effects on or off completely. And this one next to this is split Q. Split Q is something that has been added to this unit since launch. A few of these things have actually. And it's something that a lot of DJs like. So the way split Q works is it puts the whole signal into one of your headphones and whatever you've got the Q button set to in the other one. It basically is a way of DJing without speakers near you, and you can DJ at midnight in a home where everyone else is asleep, for instance, just as easily as you can DJ in a club where the monitor speakers aren't working very well using split Q. And that split Q button there is what will turn that on and off. Moving on to the full library view, which we reach by tapping library here. So to run through this again quickly, at the top we have our source. This is where anything that we have plugged in or available will show. Here I have some streaming sources. I also have the USB around the back. If I had an SD card plugged in at the front, that would show there as well. Here we have our crates. Here we have our playlists, and the difference between crates and playlists is that crates cannot have tracks in any order that you choose, and you can only have a track in one crate. Playlists are a lot more fluid. You can choose how many times the tracks appear in however many playlists you want, and you can reorder the tracks in any order you want in playlists. Crates are for big areas of your collection. Playlists are for more fluid, day-to-day playlists. So moving down, we have what's called the prepare window. This is where tracks that we've marked for quite likely to want to play soon will appear. Then we have a folder view where we can literally browse as if it was an operating system on a computer through the folders and files to get to stuff on our attached devices. And then the final one is our search view, which I'll talk to you about in a second. Again, we can tap here like this to scroll through our collection. And again, we can swipe to load, but it works slightly differently in this view. If I swipe to the right, it says load, and it's going to ask me whether I want to load to deck 1 or deck 2. If I swipe to the left, it adds it to the prepare window. This is New Orders Blue Monday. I'll now go back to prepare here, and Blue Monday Acapella has now been added at the bottom there in the prepare window. So slightly different way, slightly confusing actually, of adding your tracks when you're in the library view. By touching and holding on a track, you get to look at this window here, which will give you more information about that track. It'll give you the full information that's saved with the metadata and the artwork and other stuff, including where on the drive it is as well. And indeed the file name is there as well. So there's a lot of extra information on all the tracks by tapping and holding. Just a couple more things about the prepare window here. These are tracks that are prepared to play in my set. But if I decide I don't want to play these tracks, then I can easily get rid of them from the prepare window by swiping them to the left. And it will say remove from prepare. That's gone there. So no longer do I want to play that track, so I just do that. And indeed, you can get rid of all the tracks from the prepare window by tapping the cross at the top to clear the whole list. To search, you tap on search at the bottom next to library, and it brings up a keyboard. So I want to look for my new Groove Armada track. And there it is. He's on My Heart by Groove Armada. I knew it was on here somewhere, found it within 4 clicks. Now also up here, you can filter. So the filters available to you are genre, artist, album, BPM and key. Genre, artist and album are pretty self-explanatory. Let's look at BPM though. So I'll click into BPM and I've got all the available BPMs in this particular collection here. And I can tap on one of them. I want to find my stuff at 120 BPM. Now you'll notice in the results here, the BPM go from 117 all the way up to 123. And that's because this is set to give me a tolerance of plus minus 3 in the BPM search, which is good because, of course, it's quite easy to mix from 117 to 120 BPM, and so you've got a whole range of tracks here based around that central BPM, and you can alter the parameter there for how wide that search is, which I'll show you a little bit later on. And it's the same with key. In musical key, here's the musical keys that are available to me here. If I want to search for something in the key of, I'm playing something in the key of 8A and I want to look at stuff that is similar, well, now it's showing me tracks that it knows will mix because they're in the same or a compatible key. And again, you can alter the way that works later on. And you can do what I just did, searching within your filter results. So I could filter by house and then search within that as well. You just type away once you've done that filter, and then the search bar is still available to you to do that. Let me show you how to work with crates and playlists now. So I'm going to go into the playlist area here, and I'm going to tick this little pen and notepad at the top. And when that's turned on, I get a few options which weren't here before. And the first one I want to show you is a way of creating your own playlist inside. I'll click Create Playlist here, and I'll give this playlist a name, Test Playlist. So I now have a new playlist here called Test, but it's got no tracks in it. So in order to add tracks to your playlist, you search through your music, selecting anything you might want to put in there, and then grabbing any of those tunes and pulling. And what happens is you get a moving, floating window like this. Tells you at the bottom 3 tunes that I'm adding here to my test. Let go there, and they've now been added to test. So I can click on test, get out of there, and there we go. In my test playlist, I've got these 3 tunes here. Now, just like before, I can click order here and decide whether I want to order these by BPM or artist or whatever. But play order, which is what's currently selected, lets me click on the little pen icon here, and I can rearrange these into any order I want by holding them like this and moving them around like this. And this is a way of turning my playlist into something that makes more sense to me. I'd probably want to start with stuff I'm more likely to play early on at the beginning and more likely to play at the end of a set towards the end. Really powerful way of organizing your music in the same way you would organize your music in a record crate. To remove a playlist or a crate, drag like this to the left and remove comes up, and I can click on remove and it will delete it. Now, there was one thing that I wanted to tell you about sync, which I didn't tell you earlier on, so let's cover that off now. So when you've got 2 tracks playing, get this track somewhere back near the beginning of it. When you've got 2 tracks playing that you want to sync up, I've now got those 2 tracks in sync because the sync buttons are on both tracks. And you can tell that by looking at these 2 sync symbols here. They are both marked with a little line through them and a green colour rather than the grey colour from before. These are now fully beat synced together. The beats are lined up and the tempo's lined up. If I move one of these tracks by nudging it slightly off, well, they're still at the right BPM. They're still at the same, synced at the same speed, but they're now no longer lined up beats wise. One's a little bit out from the other. And I can see that because by looking at the symbol here on the track I moved, it's lost that line through the middle. It's still got sync on, it's still in green. If I press shift and press sync, it's now totally not turned on the sync function and it's gone back to being grey. If I press sync again, it's now going to line the beats up for me again. And my beats are lined up again. But as soon as I throw it out, I lose that little line and the sync flashes to tell me that these are not synced, or that deck is not synced with the master deck there. So there's 2 types of sync there, tempo sync and beat sync. Let's move on to the pads then, and I want to talk to you first about hot cues. So hot cues are a way of putting a cue point down on a track that is remembered next time you load that track. And you have 8 hot cues that you can use here. You can name and adjust the color of these in the software, in the actual laptop software. However, you can add and remove them really easily here as well. So let's start this track playing again somewhere near the beginning. And I'll set a few hot cues. Let's set one here. Watch the screen, you'll see them appearing. Notice they're getting their own individual colours. So I've set 3 hot cues there. Let's set one here for the 4th. Now those are now set, and I can jump back to those cues by just pressing them. Let's jump back right to the beginning of the track by pressing this one. Or near the beginning anyway. That's cue 2. The final one was when the music began, right? Let's have a listen. Back to that one near the beginning. So hot cues will let you move around. Now if the track's paused, hot cues will move there and wait. So hot cues respect where the track is, unlike this cue here, which will always stop when you press it, whether the track's playing or not. So hot cues will respect the state of the track, playing or paused. But most importantly, there's lots of them and they get saved. Now there's 4 there. If I press bank, I get 4 more. So I could put 5, 6, 7, 8 there, and bank will switch between them, and they all show on the waveform. Getting rid of hot cues is as simple as holding down shift and pressing a cue. All those hot cues have now been removed. The loop button has 2 functions. We saw me pressing it again to get the green one, right? Let's start off with the blue one. This will let us set a loop on the track on these buttons. Let's set a loop here. Start, finish. Now you can see the loop is shown on the screen here. It's showing me that that is my loop that I just set, and it's now remembered on here. Now if I touch this again, the track will move on. But if I press that loop button now, which as you can see is lit up, it will go back to that loop and activate it. So let's get out of that one and set another one. Let's set one at the beginning of this music. I'll set a really short loop there at the beginning of that music. Get out of it. Go back to it. Go back to the first one. Second one. And you get 8 loops as well, because you get the bank button to press to get 5 to 8. There's 1 to 4 there. If I press the loop button again, I enter into the second loop mode. And this loop mode is different. This is auto loop. So on auto loop, I can press these buttons to get an automatic loop of a very short length there, a longer length there, double that one there, and double that one there. You can see the one you selected by looking at the top. This is a 2-beat loop, a 1-beat loop, a half-beat loop, and a quarter-beat loop. And pressing it again will turn that off. Bank will give me longer loop lengths. See, I've got 32, 16, 8, and 4 there. Now, possibly more useful is the loop roll button, because this has got a hidden twist that makes it more of a performance feature than the auto loops we just looked at. Let's just reset some of this, get out of those loops that we're currently in, and hit loop roll. So in loop roll, easiest to just show you. It gives you a loop at a predetermined length, as you saw there. I was doing loops at fractions of beats and so on, but the track continues playing underneath, even though you can't hear it. And as soon as your hand leaves that button, the track carries on from where it would have played. And so it's quite expressive, because you can add these little flourishes, but when you stop, it's as if you hadn't done anything and the groove has carried on underneath. And you can actually see that on the waveform. Let's do that again, and this time keep an eye on the waveform. The left hand half of the waveform will show the loops part of the track, and the right hand half will show where the track has carried on playing to. It's actually the other way around. It's the right hand side of the track that's showing you the looped section, and the left hand side of the track is where it would have been. The dimmed out part is where it would have been had I not pressed that button. Now you might be wondering, what's the difference between the green and the purple on these buttons here? Well, the green buttons are standard fractions of a beat. So that is a fraction of a beat. That is actually 1 beat. That's half a beat. That's 2 beats. So they're fractions of a beat, double or half. However, the Purple ones are triplets. This is a different way of timing music that gives you a different feel. So it's a certain rhythm that can sound really good, and actually it sounds great on echo, not that that's what I'm showing you now, but it is something that is colored differently there so that you can be aware it might throw your timing off. They're a bit more specialized triplets, so if you want to experiment with using loop rolls and you're not sure what they are, that's why they're colored differently. You can just avoid them and use the green ones, which will give you a more standard result. Now, if you remember, holding down the view button takes us to this menu window. And that's what we're going to look at now. We're going to talk through the menus. There are 4 menus here: Utility, Source, Preferences, and Record. And we're going to start off by looking at the Utility menu. The Utility menu begins with Wi-Fi. And this determines whether or not Wi-Fi is on or off. And if it's on, you're going to need to choose the Wi-Fi network, right? We're currently connected to Digital DJ Tips, all good. But that's where you will add Wi-Fi networks if you haven't got any. Moving down, nudge sensitivity decides how sensitive the nudging is here on the jog wheel. So currently, you can hear it's quite sensitive. If I set that to low, it's far finer. And max, I can actually stop the track by spinning it. You'll find something that suits you there. If in doubt, leave on mid. Track preview tells you whether or not the preview function is set on. And let me show you how track preview works. In a track in my library, if I want to listen to the track that I've currently got selected in my headphones, then I can do that by tapping on that little headphones icon and the play button there. And that's now playing in my headphones. You can see a play bar is appearing on the track here. And indeed, I can tap through the track to move through the track and listen to different parts of it to decide if it's something I want to play or not. And that can be turned on or off here. It might just be something you never do and it gets in the way. So that's where you turn it on or off. Here, where it says screen, we can choose how bright the screen is. I've got my screen currently set to low brightness. You can have a different brightness set for whether you've got the mains electricity plugged in or whether you are running on a battery. And that's of course useful for preserving battery, but also useful if you're DJing outside in the sunshine. You're going to want that set to max to have any chance of seeing it properly, right? So there's your chance to do that whether you're on plugged in or battery. Moving down to the mixer settings, mic attenuation decides how loud the microphones are as a global measure. So you can dial that back a little bit there or have it at full volume. Send mic to booth decides whether the microphone is sent out of the booth outputs on the back as well as the master outputs. And you might not want to do that because if you're in a DJ booth with a speaker pointing at you so you can hear the music properly and you pick up a microphone, that sets up a very close feedback loop. Whereas if that's not got the microphone in it and the only speakers with the microphone in are the ones way out there on the dance floor, it's far less likely to feedback. So you get a chance there of setting that to something which works for you. EQ type decides whether the EQs are normal or isolating. So let me show you the difference between the two. So if I turn the EQs down now, all the way down, you can still hear that track. Very quietly, but you can still hear it. That's because it's set to normal. Let's set it to isolate. Now that has killed the track entirely. Some DJs prefer that level of control. For others, you know, why would you do that if you've got a volume control? Totally up to you. You set that how you want. EQ high and EQ low crossover decides where these EQs affect the audio in the frequencies. How big is the low area? Does it move in towards the low mids or does it just go into the really sub bass? Well, you can affect that by changing the crossover frequencies here. Filter resonance decides how nice the sweep filters sound. So currently, resonance is set to 0. This is a bit like a tone control. If I set resonance to high, this is going to sound much more musical. So you get to choose how kind of musical those filters are. Filter extreme type decides whether the filter, when it's at its furthest reach, kills the music entirely or whether you can still hear a very little bit of the music. Moving down, Q solo mode decides whether the Q buttons can be put on together. Now on a 2-channel controller, the chances of you wanting to do that are pretty slim, right? You're never really going to want to play both tracks together here because it's the same as the master output in a lot of ways. So if that's never going to be of use to you, you can set Q solo mode on. Now, when you press this Q, that one will go off. So it's only one press as you're DJing from deck to deck to deck instead of having to remember to turn one off and turn the other one on. Split Q mode, we've already talked about, we saw it in the toolbar. So now we're down to the integrations. This is where you turn on your streaming integrations. Here we have Tidal, SoundCloud and Beatport link. Beat source link has just been added at the time of recording this in the latest beta. So as you're watching this, you've probably got that. So you can decide whether they show or not in the source menu here. And then we've just got device info at the end of that menu. Let's have a little look at the streaming integrations now. By clicking on the little icon at the top there, I can choose the source. So let's switch away from my local USB to Beatport. Here I've got Beatport's top 100 tracks. I can dive down by genres in Beatport here. Here's our Beatport genres updating here. You'll notice they've all got the BPM, they've all got the key, which is really cool. I can go into Beatport's latest tracks. Latest dance and electro pop is loading away here. There they are. I can also go into my own playlists that I've sorted out on Beatport, and here's my top 20 techno tracks from the last decade there. And you can also access tracks that you've bought on Beatport, so it's almost like a cloud, and you just load these in the normal way by clicking on them. There we go, that track's now loading on this deck. You can see it's downloading there. A few seconds later, there's a track that's been loaded from the cloud in Beatport, and I can't play you that because it won't let me record and talk to you about it at the same time, because one of the limitations of this is that the record function in this that I'm using to record and play back everything I'm doing for you doesn't work with streaming services. So if you want to record your sets on any DJ gear that uses streaming services, you'll have to use a different way of recording your sets than the way they provide for you, because they have to turn that off as part of their licenses. It's a bit naff, I know, but hey, that's how it is. Okay, let's go back to our menus. We've now looked through the utility menu. Let's move on to the preferences. So in the preferences menu, the first preference we have is the track start preference. This decides whether it starts the track right from the very beginning or from the first cue point. I suggest you have it set to cue position, and then very quickly you're going to have a cue point at the beginning of all your tracks. It will start it from the beginning if there isn't a cue point there anyway, so nothing lost. The next one is the default speed range. This decides whether by default the track speeds up or down by a percentage you choose, and you can choose anything from plus or minus 4% to plus or minus 50%. Sync mode is whether the default sync mode is one of the two we talked about, whether it will attempt to match the beats up for you or just get the tracks to the same speed. Some DJs coming to this kind of gear from vinyl who aren't used to sync think in the end, you know, it's quite good having the system get the speed right for me because it saves me having to do it all on my headphones like this. But when it has, I want to mix the way I've always mixed. Then you're going to prefer tempo mode. If you are new to this, set it to beat sync mode because it's going to just make it easier for you. So sync button action decides that the sync button itself, whether to turn that on or off. You see, I can't turn that sync button off now because this isn't turned on. If I turn this to toggle, now I can turn the sync button on and off like this. The way of turning the sync button on and off when you're on shift disable is, not surprisingly, by pressing shift and touching sync to disable it. Again, you might want to just be sure that you're not going to accidentally turn sync off, and that is a way of doing that. The pitch control type decides whether the pitch bend controls down here are primarily pitch bend, which I've shown you to slow or speed the track up momentarily, or primarily the range of the pitch control. If you never use these controls to slow or speed the track up because you're always happy using nudge on the jog wheel, you might want to reverse that so that it will always control the range. Just saves you having to hold down shift and press this to change the pitch range. The other one will go to the shift function if you swap that around, so they're still both on there. Cue loop quantization decides if you have quantization switched on by that pull down toolbar I showed you, by which amount, fraction of or multiple of beats it's going to snap to. In other words, it's currently set to half a beat. So when I have quantize on, if I press start on a loop and it's not quite on the beat, it will jump to the nearest half beat. at the moment, but I could set it to 1, so it would always jump to the nearest beat. I could set it to 4, so it would always jump to the nearest musical bar. Or if I'm very quick at what I'm doing, I could set it to a lower amount, like an eighth or a quarter of a beat. Most DJs who use quantize tend to have that set to 1. A lot of DJs wouldn't dare, wouldn't want to, wouldn't never care for quantize. So paused hot cue behavior decides whether when you're paused, hot cues will do what they did when I demonstrated them to you. Because if you remember when we were looking at hot cues a minute ago, I said if you're playing a track and it's paused and you press the hot cue, it will jump there and wait, or whether it will jump there and just play. Other DJ gear from other manufacturers will just play whatever the hot cue, whatever the track's doing, playing or paused. It will just play when you hit a hot cue. So you can choose that behavior there if you're used to it being the other way. Default loop size, when I hit an auto loop, decides how many beats long that loop is. Smart loops decides whether loops jump to the nearest beat when you turn them on or not. Move cue to loop in decides whether when you set a loop on a track, whether it moves the temporary cue to the beginning of that loop automatically. I showed you how to set temporary cues, right? You pause the track and then you press the cue button. But sometimes you might want the temporary cue to be set to the beginning of somewhere you're looping for performance reasons, and that will allow you to choose that. Now, moving on to display, there's a few things we can change on the display here. You can decide whether in the menus they're showing you the track title or the metadata. Track title decides whether on the lists of tracks in your software you see the track title, or if I press file name, it's going to show me the file name of that track. Some people, old school people, might want to keep all the info they need in their file name, and that way you can see your file name instead. Time format just decides whether the amount of time left or elapsed is altered when you change the speed controls, because of course if you speed a track up, it's going to last less time than if you slowed it down, but that will decide whether it respects the actual length of the track or the effective length left, depending upon where this is set. Moving on to safety, lock playing deck will stop you accidentally loading something onto a deck that's currently playing. However, it does mean that you have to press pause before loading something onto that deck. I find that when I'm auditioning my tunes, practicing mixes, listening through a load of new music, I just want to be able to throw something onto a deck that's currently playing and listen to it. So I will turn that off in that kind of mode. When I'm performing, I tend to turn that on again to stop me making that mistake. Needle lock decides whether when we scroll, as you saw me doing earlier, through the waveforms at the top of the screen, whether we do that when the track's paused or whether we can do it at any time we want, even if the track's playing. And padlock just turns off these pads, these performance pads. If you never use them, you think you might hit them by mistake, you can lock them and that's it. They're not for you, they're turned off. Finally, library. So we've got a few things here that we can alter in the way the library looks. So key notation decides whether the musical key is shown to us in standard musical notation, and you can choose whether the notes in between the main notes, if you like, are shown as sharp or flat notes, whether it shows us in the Camelot notation, which is the one preferred by DJs, or open key, which is Traktor's version of Camelot. It's a licensing thing, but it's your choice, depends on what you're used to there. Key filter is our way of telling it. Remember when we were looking at the filtering by key and I said it's showing us the same key and compatible keys? Well, you can set that to only show the same key if you want. And the BPM ranges here, this is going to decide whether when it's analyzing music, whether it decides something is below or higher than a set amount. So in other words, if all your music is chill out music, you might want to set this to 58 to 115. So when it's analyzing your music, it doesn't accidentally think it's drum and bass and give you a 180 BPM for a 90 BPM song. But conversely, if you always play high tempo music, you might want to set it up here. Just leave that set in the middle. The BPM filter tolerance is where, remember when we were filtering by BPM and I said we're at 120 but it's showing us 117 and 123? Well, that's where you can say plus or minus how many beats, and you can decide the range of music that you're likely to want to mix into the current track and therefore have that shown to you there. And finally, you have deck color down here. Doesn't do very much on this system because there's not much color going on here, but this is a way on the Prime family of altering the colors of your decks, and on some of the bigger ones you've got really big coloured jog wheels which look really nice when you choose different colours. As I say, not an awful lot of fun there on a little controller like this, but that's what that does. Now let's move on to the other menus, and they're much smaller than this one. The source menu is just showing you the available sources for your music, and at the moment I've only got this available source in the back, but I might have had an SD card plugged in the front, and then that would show there as well. And finally, the record menu lets me record my set. Start recording, pause my recording, continue my recording, stop my recording, give my recording a name, save my recording. That's now been saved to this drive here, and now I can take that off there on a computer, edit it further, and there's my mix all recorded inside the unit. Make sure you've got enough room on your drives if you're going to do that. You don't want your drive filling up and your recording stopping without you knowing about it. Now, the Prime Go is an awesome unit, right? And I've just given you a comprehensive video tutorial on everything it does. But as I said at the beginning, that's not the full picture. If you're already a seasoned DJ, you now have everything you need to either decide whether this is for you or to quickly get started with it if you've ordered it or yours has just arrived. But if not, the way we teach DJing in this book is, as I said at the beginning, all about getting you out there quickly and actually doing this, bypassing the trap of thinking you need to sit in your bedroom for months or years learning this. But we also teach the 5 big areas of DJing. What I've just taught you lives in the first area, the gear. Indeed, it's only part of the gear knowledge you need. As well as understanding your DJ console, you've got to understand how to plug into PA systems, how to gain stage for great sound, and countless other geeky things. And there are the other areas as well. There's music. You need to know how to assemble and organise and work a music collection, so you've always got the right track to play next. You need to understand the techniques of DJing, what to do in order to get the right sound coming out of your speakers and to keep your dance floors full. You need to understand how to perform, because doing all of this in public is very different to doing it in your bedroom. And you also need to understand how to promote yourself, to get the gigs, how to get yourself out there so people naturally ask you to DJ and not someone else. It's only when you've got all those 5 things, gear, music, techniques, playing out and promoting yourself, that you can actually start progressing as a DJ. Now, they're not hard to learn, but the big mistake most people make is only trying to learn one of them. Typically it's the techniques, right? The mixing. I just want to learn to mix, people say. Indeed, a lot of the DJ courses out there are all about mixing. But guess what? If you don't understand the gear, if you're hopeless at finding and organising the music, if you're too scared to play in front of other people because nobody taught you through the steps of how to do that, and if you haven't got a clue how to get those bookings anyway, well, it's not actually going to be that useful being able to mix, right? So we discovered that the fast track to DJing success is to learn those 5 areas, which is how we teach. Now, I want you to have a free copy of our book where I'll help you to get started in all those areas. You can do that by joining Digital DJ Tips for free. All the links are underneath. And when you're ready, I'd be thrilled to have you as a student on our complete DJ course, where I'll show you everything you need to know to become a great DJ across all of those 5 areas. It works for all gear, including this unit. Again, there's a link underneath for the complete DJ course. I'll see you there. Meanwhile, get good, get out there and make the moments.